Chapter 818. Irregulars. Assemble. Master Jet pointed at another new symbol on the screen of his communicator. The process is basically the same. You can shop for members of the cohort through your comm. Well, not really. Contribution points have nothing to do with the selection, of course. There is a pool of elite awakened fighters that have been transferred to this port. The first irregular company has priority right to recruit 42 of them, 6 per cohort. As the youngest captain, you get the first pick. Sonny stared at the screen, deep in thought. So the first thing he had to do was to pick 6 awakened that would become his soldiers during the Antarctica campaign. He had no doubt that each of them was an elite warrior among the government forces, but being a good fighter was not enough. Creating a strong cohort was no small feat. Its members not only had to be able to pull their own weight, but also meet a long list of needs that a combat unit possessed. This was especially true for the 7 cohorts that were going to comprise the first irregular company, since each of them was expected to operate independently. In a sense, this approach was more familiar to him. Awakened serving a large force were able to specialize within the confines of their units. One cohort could do especially well in melee combat, but lacked the means of dealing damage from range. Another cohort could specialize in attacking exclusively from distance. By working together, these different units were able to shore up each other's weaknesses and allow the soldiers to express their greatest strengths. An independent cohort was very different. Although it could possess a specialization, it had to be well-rounded and excel in various aspects by necessity. This is how most cohorts in the dream realm functioned, and what Sonny was familiar with. In any case, choosing 6 awakened that could fulfill a multitude of roles while synergizing with each other was a daunting task. There was a lot of factors he would have to consider. And after that, he had to assume command of these strangers and lead them into battle after battle. Their survival was his responsibility. Their deaths, should any of his soldiers fall, would be on his conscience, too. Sonny let out a long sigh, then looked at Master Jet. "Any advice?" She lingered for a few moments, then nodded. "No matter how good these elites are, you will still be the core element and the deadliest weapon of the cohort. Don't neglect variability, but choose those whose aspects complement yours." Sonny smiled. That won't be a problem. I might not excel in any one thing, but at the same time, I am sort of a jack of all trades. While my aspect leans toward utility, I can do a bit of everything. That leaves me at a disadvantage in some situations, but it also means that I can work well with a great variety of awakened. Anyone can benefit from having me by their side, and vice versa. Master Jet thought for a few moments. Versatility is a strength in and of itself. Since you are not limited by a narrow focus, the best course of action would be to assemble a well-balanced group of fighters that can respond to any situation with a high level of effectiveness. That will actually make my job a bit easier, since I'll be able to send your cohort to solve a wider variety of problems. She lingered for a bit and then added, "If there is one piece of advice I can give, it's to not neglect utility in favor of direct combat strength. Antarctica, no matter how prepared we think we are, it is going to test us in ways that no one expects. Things will go wrong and then go from bad to worse. Mobility, survival, mental resilience, all these things and plenty others might turn out to be much more important than we think. It is also going to be a long, cruel, and punishing campaign. Keep that in mind." Sonny sighed. Long, cruel, and punishing. That was basically the description of most of his experiences with the nightmare spell. That was nothing new. He stared at his communicator for a bit, then asked, "What about after I've assembled the cohort? Most of these soldiers are probably older than me. They are also devoted government servants, while I am somewhat of a hired mercenary. I doubt that they will be happy to be under command of someone like me, instead of one of the other distinguished masters." Soul Reaper shook her head. You are not exactly correct. Sure, you are younger than the other captains of our company. Some might see it as a weakness, but at the same time, it's a sign of excellence and greater potential. After all, none of us managed to ascend before turning 20. I am considered somewhat of a prodigy, and you beat my record by 5 years. So I don't expect these soldiers to show reluctance to respect your command." She paused, then added in a serious tone, "However, there is a great difference between being able to issue orders and being able to inspire confidence. There is no easy method to make your soldiers follow you, not simply obey you. You will have to find a way to win their loyalty on your own, Sonny." Master Jet smiled. "However, I don't think that it will be too hard. Once we reach Antarctica, things will fall into place. Lead them to victory, keep them alive, and they'll learn to trust you." Sonny thought for a bit, then nodded. Actions spoke louder than words. He might face some resistance at the start, but battle would swiftly resolve everything. Either he would win his soldiers over or all 7 of them would die. In any case, the problem was going to disappear. Soul Reaper briefly gripped his shoulder and then said, "Anyway, I don't think you should worry about these matters yet. You have plenty of other issues to solve. No matter how professional and prepared these guys are, forming a strong cohort takes more than simply assembling all its members together. You will all have to learn how to fight side by side and leverage your unique powers to form good synergy. Well, I don't have to tell you. You're not a novice." Sonny scratched the back of his head. "Yeah, I have some experience with that." She sighed. "Do remember that you will only have 3, maybe 4 weeks left to prepare. That is not nearly enough time to deepen the cooperation level of the cohort, but do as much as you can. There will be proper training facilities aboard the ships, so don't stop working until we make landfall." Sonny looked at her with a serious expression. "I won't." Master Jet nodded, then waved a hand. "Well, I bet you have enough to think about. I'll leave you to it then. Don't take too much time deciding on who you want to recruit. The sooner you settle that, the sooner you can start bringing your cohort to shape and spending those sweet contribution points." He smiled and looked as she turned around and disappeared into one of the corridors of the underground bunker. Then Sonny lowered his gaze and studied the screen of his communicator. He had a lot to think about, indeed. The room provided to Sonny was a far cry from the luxurious cabin he had enjoyed on the train. It was small, Spartan, and lacked windows due to being located deep underground. The designers of the military bunker did not even install a false one, so the walls lacked the lifelike projections of the outside. Not that Sonny cared about such things. In fact, he quite liked the solid nature of his temporary quarters. Perhaps things would have been different if he did not possess the ability to escape to the surface with the help of Shadow Step, but since he did, the fear of being buried under countless tons of stone and soil was not bothering him too much. The room reminded him of his hidden lair in the ruined cathedral of the Dark City, which was a pleasant bonus. Sitting on a narrow bed, Sonny sighed and projected the screen of his communicator on the opposite wall. Leaning back, he then got lost in thought for a few minutes. In the next day or so, he would have to make a lot of important decisions. There were a lot of things to consider. While the task seemed daunting, he was rather excited to start. It's like playing a game, only without checkpoints and real human lives at stake, including mine. So, I guess nothing like a game, actually. The first thing he did was acquaint himself with the default set of assets provided to his future cohort by the government. This generous and highly optimized array of premium gear and equipment included everything to cover the basic needs of his unit during their deployment in Antarctica, from thermoregulated outerwear to priceless Spelltech medical kits and beyond. The centerpiece of the set was, without a doubt, an advanced all-terrain personnel carrier that was going to serve as the mobile home of his cohort in the future. This heavily armored transport vehicle resembled an angular, high-tech mix between a turtle and a rhinoceros. Of course, Sonny only knew what a rhinoceros was because he had looked up the extinct beast after learning that the APC was colloquially known as rhino. It was hard to believe that the massive thing was an actual animal and not a strange nightmare creature. Despite its prodigious size and thick armor, the Rhino armored personnel carrier was capable of moving with immense speed across various terrains. It could even climb mountains without too much problem, provided that the driver knew what they were doing. The advanced variant provided to the cohorts of the first irregular company was additionally modified with even more robust armor, inordinately powerful engines, enhanced internals, and a sophisticated command and communications suite. Of course, there was always room for improvement. In fact, the interface offered Sonny a lot of opportunities to enhance the APC much further. These additional augmentations were going to cost him a lot of contribution points, however. Still, he was inclined to believe that they would be worth it. The armored vehicle was not only going to be responsible for keeping his cohort mobile, it would also serve as the logistical core of their deployment. Its importance was already apparent due to the fact that the default set of assets provided by the government was based on its carrying capacity. The logistics and supply officers in charge of compiling this array of gear were not familiar with the covetous coffer, of course. Thanks to his loyal toothy chest, Sonny would be able to more or less double his cohort's storage space. That alone gave him a lot of flexibility as far as spending contribution points on additional equipment was concerned. The tech is important, however, it is also unreliable. Gates were known to mess with technology in various ways. The military vehicle certainly included several measures to minimize that effect, but it would still be prudent of him to beef this aspect up. After all, no one knew what would happen if dozens, or even hundreds of gates came to exist in the area around the APC at the same time. That was something for Sonny to think about later, however. Now that he knew what he was dealing with, he had a clearer picture of what kind of awakened he wanted to recruit. Closing one interface and opening another, he rubbed his temples and sighed. That is not going to be easy. Soon enough, hundreds of concise dossiers were in front of him, each containing the personnel file of one of the best awakened soldiers stationed in the port. Most of them were going to be assigned to other units, while 42 would become members of the elite first irregular company. 6 of them would be his own subordinates. For a while, Sonny was paralyzed by all the choices. Each dossier contained the description of the awakened's aspect and abilities, their service record and psychological profile, as well as of additional skills and specializations that the soldier might have mastered and other information. His task was to pick 6 warriors who would not only comprise a well-rounded cohort and complement his own powers, but also work well with each other both in terms of combat ability and interpersonal compatibility. The former was already hard enough, but the latter gave him a headache. Luckily, very few people working for the government possessed contrarian and antisocial personalities. People who chose the life of service were predisposed to having a certain level of agreeableness by definition. Unlike Sonny, he was contrarian and antisocial enough to balance out their agreeableness all by himself. One thing that the files did not include, regretfully, was detailed information about the flaws of these elite soldiers. Not even the government servants were comfortable sharing something like that with their employer. Each file only mentioned how severe the flaw had been judged to be through passive observation, and sometimes an approximate evaluation of its specific effects. Which was a shame. A serious enough flaw could derail any battle plan. Just out of curiosity, Sonny looked up the dossiers of the other ascended captains, Vandal, Mustang, Queen, Knight, and Pride as well. Their files were also there, although in a much more redacted version. Reading what little was left unredacted, he couldn't help but whistle. Impressive. Master Jet's personal file was even more obscure. Pretty much everything except for her name and rank was blacked out. His own dossier was rather short and mostly consisted of question marks. Either the government truly knew so little about him, or simply chose not to show how well they were informed. Well, at least they got my height right. Sonny closed the file and shook his head. He could not allow himself to delay the task any further. He was in for a long and sleepless night. Sonny knew what he needed, more or less. A couple of frontline fighters, a couple of range specialists, someone to provide utility. A healer, ideally, although even among these elites there were too few. Fortunately, Sonny himself possessed a wide range of versatile abilities that could cover many needs of the cohort. He was able to fight up close or at range. He could scout or flank the enemies by using Shadow Step. He could use Shadow Manifestation to accomplish a multitude of tasks. Still, covering all the basics was not enough. The Antarctica campaign was promising to be long and grueling, maybe even unbearable. He had no doubt that they would face all kinds of nightmare creatures, from landbound to aerial to aquatic. Some of them were going to try and kill them with brutal force. Some would employ more insidious means. To ensure the best chances of survival, the cohort had to be strong, balanced, and capable of accomplishing more than the sum of its parts would suggest. They had to be able to work together and respond to all kinds of threats. Even with several hundred candidates, he was not sure how possible it was to build something as formidable as his own cohort had been, both on the Forgotten Shore and the Chained Isles. First things first. Although some would have been tempted to go for offensive powerhouses first, Sonny made a different opinion. He filtered the dossiers, allowing only those of awakened with utility aspects to remain. Master Jet had been right. Although pure combat strength was immensely important, a war was often lost or won off the battlefield. As far as Sonny was concerned, utility was just as vital. His own experience confirmed it. Back on the Forgotten Shore, fighters like Nephi's and Castor had shone so bright that everyone paid them all the attention. People like Sonny and Cassie remained more or less unnoticed. However, they had contributed as much, if not more, to the cohort's survival. Yes, those with pure combat aspects played a larger role in direct confrontations with the nightmare creatures. But it was only because Sonny had scouted ahead that they had been able to avoid battling swarms of abominations that would have overwhelmed them in an instant. Cassie's uncanny intuition and affinity to revelation had saved them too many times to count. It had helped the cohort avoid lethal dangers that often could not be seen, let alone slain with a blade. Not paying enough attention to utility would have been a grave mistake. More than that, this choice would allow Sonny to handpick other members of the cohort to suit the ensuing situation. The first decision would widen and define the cohort's foundation, making the rest easier to make. He spent a lot of time reading through dozens of dossiers. There were all kinds of talented awakened that possessed incredible abilities. Eventually, Sonny narrowed the selection to just 3 of the most interesting candidates. A mature and experienced awakened caught his eye due to the ability to move and shape Earth as if it was a liquid, and then swiftly turn it back to solid state. With his help, the cohort would be able to literally shape the battlefield to stack the odds in their favor. While that ability was too slow and weak to deal direct damage, Sonny could imagine building all types of funnels, defensive walls, and trenches with the man's help. Hell, in certain situations, they would even be able to turn the ground into quicksand, trapping multiple abominations, or at least reducing the mobility of the enemy. Their own mobility was also an issue. No matter how versatile the Rhino was, there would be situations, without a doubt, where its incredible all-terrain maneuverability would fail. The ability to create a road was going to come in extremely handy at that time. Another government elite seemed even more useful. This tall and athletic man was capable of creating stable short-distance spatial rifts. Basically, he could allow the fighters of the cohort to teleport around the battlefield with impunity. Sunny did not have to think long to understand how incredible this ability was. He had used Shadow Step to vanquish his foes numerous times, and granting the same advantage to the whole cohort was an indescribably potent tool. Hell, he didn't even have to send people through this rift. Throwing a Spelltech grenade or a manifestation of a sorceress aspect ability would wreak havoc among the enemies just as well. The third candidate was a young woman with mousy hair and an unassuming face. Her ability seemed less potent than that of the two men, but could also be quite useful in the right situations. Just like Cassie, the young woman possessed an affinity to revelations, albeit a much lesser one. While she couldn't compete with Song of the Fallen in the broadness of application, the narrow focus of her aspect was capable of producing more palpable results. The young woman was able to perceive weaknesses and vulnerabilities of living creatures, as well as share visual perception among several people. She, too, could comprehensively enhance the cohort's battle effectiveness, although in a less direct way. Sunny spent a long time staring at the three dossiers. Which one should he choose? Each held incredible value in his eyes. He was even tempted to claim all three. But no, while Sunny was not blind to the importance of utility, he needed powerful fighters to make use of it. Without offensive strength, the cohort would be simply unable to act on the provided opportunities. Plus, his own aspect already leaned toward utility. Eventually, he dismissed the dossiers of the two men and left only the image of the meek young woman with mousy hair on the wall. Awakened Kim. The more Sunny stared at her portrait, the more he was sure of his choice. Yes, the first candidate could shape the battlefield to their advantage, but Sunny was able to achieve a bit of that himself with the help of shadow manifestation. Yes, the second candidate could provide an indescribable tactical flexibility to the cohort. However, the short range and the stationary nature of the spatial rifts was not easy to exploit in the chaotic and unpredictable mayhem of combat. Awakened Kim, on the other hand, could provide a powerful boost to any offensive action. Her ability synergized with the widest variety of aspects, including Sunny's own. More than that, unlike the other two soldiers, her powers scaled with the threat. Being able to create a wall of stone was useless if the enemy could turn stone to dust. Being able to attack an abomination from the flank would accomplish nothing if the abomination was of a high enough rank to become immune to awakened weapons. Being able to see the vulnerabilities of the enemy, however, would be a boon for the cohort no matter how powerful of an enemy they faced. In fact, the more dire their foe, the more important Awakened Kim's ability could become. There was also another, much simpler reason why Sunny decided to choose the third candidate. The young woman could share visual perception between multiple people. Antarctica, meanwhile, enjoyed an uninterrupted night that lasted for several months. What it meant was that the first irregular company would be fighting in near-complete darkness for at least 4 months after arriving into the southern quadrant. While this problem could be somewhat solved with technology, there was a better and more reliable solution. Sunny could see in the dark, and with Awakened Kim's help, his soldiers would share in this ability too. He looked at the dossier one last time and nodded. Good. This young woman was going to be the first cornerstone of his cohort. Now that Sunny knew what kind of logistical and combat support his cohort would be able to enjoy, thanks to him, Awakened Kim, and the heavily armored Rhino, he had a tentative understanding of what direction he had to follow. In the next several hours, he carefully studied hundreds of dossiers, slowly narrowing the list of potential candidates. By the time the night was drawing to a close, he was more or less ready to make the final selection. Of course, ideally, Sonny would have preferred to meet the recruits face to face and put them through a gauntlet to get to know their characters, styles, and limits better. But in the current situation, being able to study their personnel files was already good enough. He had chosen several important traits that most, or better yet each, of the candidates had to possess. First of all, Sonny decided to favor sustainability and lasting battlefield presence over pure might and burst damage potential. Sure, many of the elite government soldiers possessed awesome aspect abilities that could deliver truly fearsome results in a short span of time. However, these awakened also burned through essence with a frightening speed. The Antarctica campaign promised to be a marathon, or rather, a marathon stacked on top of a marathon, stacked on top of a marathon, stacked on top of a marathon. Longevity was king. He vastly preferred fighting side by side with people who could maintain their peak battle state for long stretches of time, even if their immediate combat performance was not as impressive. Secondly, he deliberately paid more attention to fighters who implemented higher than usual amounts of finesse, calculation, and cunning in their approach to combat. Not only were such people better at conserving their energy, but they also suited his own inclinations very well. Additionally, fighters like these were bound to make better use of awakened Kim's ability to recognize vulnerabilities of the enemy. The third and last trait he sought out was mental fortitude. No government elite was a slouch in terms of determination and resilience, but some stood out among all others. Most of them were those awakened who had gone through crushing defeats, but were nevertheless able to pick themselves up and grow stronger for it. Sonny was more or less certain that he had endured more torment and hopelessness than even the other ascended captains of the first irregular company. As such, he had a better idea of how ruthless and punishing the long campaign in the southern quadrant could turn out to be. So, even if it meant settling for someone with less power or talent, he was determined to pick the most dogged and tenacious of the awakened elites. In the end, 6 dossiers remained projected on the wall of his small room. Awakened Kim had been his first choice. This young woman was the cornerstone of the cohort due to her valuable aspect, which allowed her to reveal the weaknesses of the enemy and share visual perception among herself and her allies. Additionally, she was a certified technician who could look after the cohort's armored personnel carrier and perform field repairs if need be. His second choice was a charismatic man in his late 20s. Awakened Bell had a lean figure, athletic build, and blonde hair. His expression on the portrait attached to the dossier was laid back and slightly carefree. Bell was a talented swordsman who excelled in offense and agility. His aspect made him especially deadly. The young swordsman was able to turn his body intangible and phase through solid matter. Despite the fact that he couldn't maintain this state for long, even a second was enough to avoid an enemy attack if used at the right moment. His second ability allowed him to infuse his weapon with unnatural sharpness and cut through most obstacles. Although the second ability devoured soul essence with terrible speed, Awakened Bell was incredibly proficient in using both of them in precise, short bursts. He only needed a fraction of a second to dodge a strike or deliver a killing blow, so there was no need to maintain them for more than that. As the result, he was able to last much longer on the battlefield than the description of his aspect would suggest. Bell was going to be one of the 2 pillars of Sonny's melee vanguard. The second pillar was a man named Dorn. Looking at his portrait, Sonny couldn't help but grimace. No, this is just ridiculous. Awakened Dorn was a giant of a man. He was easily taller than Effie and possessed robust musculature to boot. Just one look at him would have made most people feel small and feeble. The only consolation that Sonny could find was that this powerhouse would be fighting on his side. Dorn's weapon of choice was a hammer, and not a traditional war hammer, which, despite its usual portrayal in popular media, was actually a relatively light and elegant weapon. No, awakened Dorn preferred to fight with something that could only be described as an enchanted version of a sledgehammer. This heavy two-handed implement of destruction was able to crush flesh, bone, stone, and steel with equal ease. All that would have made one think that the man was a straightforward and single-minded brawler with a penchant for solving problems through brute force, but that couldn't be further from the truth. Instead, the man possessed a serious, sedate attitude and deeply intelligent eyes. His aspect could be described in 3 words: push and pull. Awakened Dorn was able to manipulate gravity, or at least something that resembled gravity, to empower his strikes with crushing weight and throw his enemies off balance. By combining these two effects in a precise and calculated manner, he was able to make use of both to vastly elevate the potency of his attacks. No matter how strong and enduring Dorn's body was, no one would have been able to wildly swing his heavy weapon around for too long. That was why he preferred to conserve his stamina and kill the enemy with one crushing, deliberate, well-timed, and devious strike. In short, despite his ridiculous size, awakened Dorn was a man after Sonny's own heart. Together, Bell and Dorn were going to be the core of the cohort's battle formation. However, there was another person whom Sonny intended to add to the melee vanguard. The third member of the melee vanguard was, perhaps, the second most important person in the cohort, after Sonny himself, of course. He had agonized over that choice a lot, but eventually settled on a handsome and chivalrous man named Quentin. Awakened Quentin preferred wearing full plate armor and wielding a sword and a shield. Unlike Bell and Dorn, he was not going to be serving as an offensive powerhouse. He was going to become the defensive bulwark of the melee vanguard, which was not to say that he wasn't a deadly fighter in his own right, of course. Quentin's aspect centered around restoration and corrosion. In battle, he was able to continuously repair his shield and his armor no matter what kind of damage they received. There were limits to this ability, of course, but as long as his memories weren't outright destroyed, they would eventually regain their original shape. He was also able to apply a corrosive property to his weapons. The corrosion was not very potent, but as long as enough of his attacks landed, the enemy was bound to eventually succumb under the weight of accumulating decay. This was a slow, but insidious and impactful ability. However, it was the first one that made awakened Quentin so valuable. That was because he was not limited to restoring only memories. Quentin's restoration was near universal and could repair various things, including human flesh. He was a healer. Of course, as far as these rare specialists went, he wasn't the most powerful. His ability was comparatively slow and limited. Quentin could not even hope to compete with someone like Nephi's or Elia's in terms of speed and efficiency, and even among other healers whose dossiers were available to Sonny, his restorative power did not stand out. But after thinking about it for a long time, Sonny still decided to go with Quentin. He did not want to employ a more potent healer if that meant that the healer would not be able to fend for themselves in a furious fight. Even though his final choice was somewhat mediocre in terms of healing wounds, the chivalrous man was a more well-rounded and versatile combatant. Sonny was inspired to make that choice by his memories of Shim, the Fire Keeper healer who had eventually inherited the leadership over Cassie's personal cohort. Despite his lack of a combat aspect, Shim always fought on the front line and supported his companions with his blade, his shield, and his steady presence. Plus, Quentin was also a trained combat medic who possessed deep knowledge of modern medicine. He could even use his ability to help repair the rhino should Kim be unable to do it through mundane means. Overall, Sonny was happy with his decision. With 4 members of the cohort already chosen, only 2 spots remained. Knowing that he would have to strengthen the ability of his soldiers to attack the enemies from distance and fight against flying abominations, Sonny spent a lot of time searching for a suitable ranged specialist. In the end, his attention was drawn to the dossier of a woman named Samara. Awakened Samara was tall, beautiful, and aloof. She possessed a very interesting aspect, though. Samara was capable of infusing material objects with soul essence, as well as converting soul energy into kinetic energy or heat. What it meant was that she could turn soul essence into charged explosives. In a sense, awakened Samara was the opposite of Master Jet. While Soul Reaper was able to deal soul damage with physical weapons, she could deal physical damage with soul essence. She was also very inventive in the applications of her aspect. Samara was probably the only awakened Sunny knew of who actively utilized modern firearms. By infusing her ammunition with charged essence, she effectively made them analogous to enchanted weapons. Nightmare creatures of higher ranks were more or less immune to mundane armaments, but susceptible to memories and even unarmed attacks of awakened. In Samara's hands, however, any weapon turned into an awakened weapon. What a fascinating ability! As an added bonus, she was also a capable spelltech engineer and technician. Since the APC the cohort would be using was chock-full of advanced spelltech, that was going to come in handy. The last member of the cohort Sunny had chosen was called Awakened Luster. Staring at the man's dossier, Sunny couldn't help but narrow his eyes. What a weird name. He shook his head and then sighed. Well, maybe his mother had a poetic soul too. The young man was not a very distinguished fighter. That was comparatively, of course, since all the elite government soldiers were solid combatants. His talent and usefulness lay mainly in his unique aspect. Although Sunny had not wanted to recruit more utility specialists, he couldn't help but change his stance after reading what young Luster was capable of. This guy was nothing short of a soul healer, or an essence battery, in more crude terms. His first ability allowed him to enhance the regeneration rate of soul essence, both his own and that of his allies. His second ability allowed him to transfer his essence to others. Sunny did not even have to think to know how vital such an aspect was going to be in the coming months. Sure, by choosing Luster, he would be sacrificing the opportunity to recruit another battle powerhouse, but the trade-off was worth it, in his opinion. In other circumstances, Sunny would have been reluctant to make this decision, but Luster's abilities synergized simply too well with that of Awakened Samara, not to mention serving as a force multiplier for every other member of the cohort. Additionally, the young man was, apparently, an ace pilot. With him in control of the Rhino, Sunny did not have to worry that the APC would fall off a cliff or get stuck in mud, or be turned into an alloy pancake by a random titan that happened to walk by. So the choice was clear. Awakened Luster would be the last member of his cohort. Sunny moved slightly and looked at the 6 dossiers one last time. Kim, Bell, Dorn, Quentin, Samara, Luster. These 6 people were going to be his soldiers. He lingered for a moment, then let out a small sigh and marked the dossiers with his personal identification code. Soon, the bureaucracy of the 1st Evacuation Army would approve the recruitment request. And then he would finally meet his new subordinates face to face. Awakened Luster was in a strange mood. On one hand, his life and career were going better than ever. Not only had he managed to become a member of the Special Forces, he also received a chance to participate in the most exciting operation of the last several decades. His status, citizenship rank, and even salary were now higher than he had ever hoped. It was hard to imagine that a guy like him managed to climb so far without being a legacy or even possessing a combat aspect. It was certainly better than working in a boring Spelltech research facility, which he had been considering before joining the government army. Plus, he was surrounded by tons of pretty girls every day. There were thousands of them in the port fortress, and even more in the greater encampment beyond. With his dashing uniform, reputation of a valiant elite, and irresistible personality, many of them paid Luster special attention. Overall, things were great. On the other hand, the world seemed to be falling apart. The exciting operation he was so enthused about could very well become his last. What a bummer! Sitting on a broken panel of a discarded prefab building, Luster watched the swarm activity in the camp below and sipped his coffee. That was another thing. Once they shipped to the southern quadrant, luxuries like coffee would probably become scarce. He would have to go back to synthetic substitutes, or even worse, drink something as disgusting as tea. The horror! Luster grimaced, then glanced at the plain-looking young woman sitting next to him. What do you think, Kimmy? Are we going to receive our assignments today? Awakened Kim hesitated for a bit, then said in an awkward tone, I don't know. Luster shook his head. Kimmy was the strangest person he had ever met. This timid girl was the only awakened he knew who somehow managed to not look hot. As far as he was concerned, that was a bizarre accomplishment. Every awakened was hot. That was just common knowledge. Everyone except for Kimmy. She single-handedly destroyed Luster's whole worldview. He just did not know what to make of that fact. Belle, who was perching on the same prefab panel, looked at them and flashed a smile. I think we will. Luster felt a rush of excitement. Oh, do you know something? The blonde daredevil leaned forward, then said in a hushed tone, I heard from my pal in logistics that Soul Reaper finalized the command structure of her unit yesterday. That means they'll start recruiting today. After that is done, the other elite units will be free to pick out the rest of us. Hell yeah. Luster grinned, remained silent for a bit, and then sighed wistfully. I know that the chances are slim, but wouldn't it be great to be picked by Soul Reaper's unit? Just imagine, Ascended Jet, she's such a bah. Before he had the chance to finish his sentence, their communicators suddenly received a notification. The strange part of it was that all three lit up simultaneously. Kimmy was the first to read the message. Her eyes widened. Seeing her reaction, Luster felt his heart sinking. Kimmy, what is it? She lingered for a moment and then showed him the screen. First Irregular Company. We've been assigned to Soul Reaper's unit. It's actually her. Luster, Kimmy, and Belle left their observation spot and headed toward the training facility where they had been ordered to gather by the end of the hour. They were a strange trio. Sure, each was considered an elite, but in usual circumstances, a combat specialist like Belle would not have been keeping company with two younger support operators. Unless they were members of his cohort, of course, which neither Luster nor Kimmy were. The Antarctica campaign, however, had changed a lot of things. While troop movements in the waking world were happening on a massive scale, something similar, but less noticeable, was currently happening in the dream realm. The awakened assigned to the 1st Evacuation Army were hastily relocating to larger and better protected citadels, so that a sudden attack of nightmare creatures could not disrupt their deployment in Antarctica. Some were going to government citadels, while some were going to impregnable legacy strongholds like Bastion or Ravenheart. All across the dream realm, thousands of awakened were participating in this quiet exodus. Luster, Kimmy, and Belle had just happened to reside in the same general area of the dream realm. The awakened serving the government banded together to brave the wilderness and reach Bastion, forming a large caravan that only grew bigger as it passed various citadels. Eventually, a couple hundred awakened all traveled together while their physical bodies were being relocated to various ports, locked inside the sleeping pods. It was a weird thing. Luster had fallen asleep in one place, but woke up thousands of kilometers south of it. In any case, in the month that it had taken him to reach Bastion on foot, he and the two other elite specialists traveling with the caravan had become somewhat close. They were not really friends, but at least knew each other. That could not be said about the other three, awakened they met, after reaching the reinforced prefab building. Luster's face grew a little dim when he realized that two of them were dudes. The third one, however. Wow! The tall, gorgeous redhead was a real bombshell. Sure, she seemed unapproachable and older than him by a good decade, but that only added to her charm. Belle lightly tapped the young man on the shoulder. "Get your head out of the gutter, fool." Luster blinked a couple of times, then looked at the swordsman with a sheepish smile. "Oh, sorry." Kimmy glanced at the two of them with confusion and said quietly, I think I know her. That is awakened Samara. When I trained to receive the technician certificate, she taught the Spelltech introduction class to us." She squirmed a little, then approached the tall woman and forced out a small smile. "Instructor Samara, it is so nice to see you again." The aloof beauty glanced at the meek young woman and nodded. "You can call me Sam. We are colleagues now." Kimmy froze for a moment. "Yes, I will, Instructor Samara. Instructor Sam." She blushed a little, and then gestured at her two companions. "These are awakened Belle and awakened Luster. We traveled to Bastion together." Samara looked at the two men, then said in an emotionless tone, "These are awakened Quentin and awakened Dorn. We just met." The six elites studied each other for some time. Eventually, Belle scratched the back of his head and asked, does anyone know who our commanding officer is?" Nobody was sure who exactly the ascended in charge of their new cohort was. Nevertheless, after briefly getting acquainted, the six awakened couldn't help but wonder. Quentin, the handsome warrior with a gallant demeanor, seemed thoughtful. "Master Sunless, I don't think I have ever heard of him. There is no ascendant of that name among those who had been with the government for a long time, that I am sure of." He lingered for a moment, and then added with slight reluctance, "I did hear a few rumors, though." Luster looked at him with a lively smile. "Come on then, don't leave us hanging." Quentin sighed, clearly uncomfortable to be participating in something that could be amounted to gossip. Eventually, however, his curiosity won over decorum. "Well, it's not much. I just heard that MasterJet deliberately postponed the formation for the first irregular company to give this gentleman enough time to arrive, and that she personally recruited him." Luster blinked a couple of times. If Soul Reaper had gone out of her way to make sure that the guy joined her unit, then he had to be a beast. Belle confirmed his suspicion. "I actually heard that Ascended Sunless is a real monster. A demon of a fighter with a wild, bloodthirsty streak. Apparently, he killed 400 awakened abominations as a sleeper. Some even say that he hunted down an ancient fallen devil before awakening." A strange silence settled in the training gymnasium. Luster scoffed. "Yeah, right, that's impossible." Samara, who had remained mostly silent before that, suddenly spoke. "My information is different. From what I've been told, he is a distinguished explorer and academic researcher. His published works are supposed to be available in the government database. They are very extensive exploration reports about dangerous regions of the dream realm and the nightmare creatures populating them." That sounded more believable. Explorers of the dream realm might not have been the most renowned fighters, but they had to be capable to survive its wild expanse. It would make sense if Soul Reaper wanted to recruit a knowledgeable academic, since the other captains of the first irregular company already covered the combat prowess in spades. Vandal, Mustang, Queen, Knight, and Pride were legends among the government soldiers. Their renown only paled in comparison to the dreaded Soul Reaper herself. Kimmy suddenly moved and said in a faltering voice, I heard that he is utterly mad. Some say that he actually comes from the Forgotten Shore, where he lived completely alone in the Dark City for a long time. They even say that Changing Star of the Immortal Flame clan once said that he was the only person she was afraid to fight. I mean, It's ridiculous, of course." Her voice gradually grew quieter and then trailed off. After a short and somewhat awkward pause, the giant man, Dorn, spoke in a steady tone. "Those are all just rumors. I only know that Ascended Sunless is relatively young, however. We don't need to guess. There is a lot that we can assume just from who he chose as the members of his cohort." Luster craned his neck and looked at the intimidating strongman. "Yeah, like what?" Dorn shrugged. "Well, for one, our composition is quite telling. We have 2 offensive fighters, a healer, a ranged specialist, and 2 support specialists. The cohort seems to be well-rounded, but it lacks means to fulfill several key roles. We don't have a reliable scout, and our defense is comparatively subpar." He paused for a moment, and then added, "That suggests that Ascended Sunless is a utility specialist with a scouting ability. Alternatively, he might be a defense-oriented fighter or simply a believer in an offense-centered military doctrine. He might also possess a powerful echo that can serve as a defensive bulwark." Dorn thought for a bit. "What is especially interesting to me is that he deliberately chose Awakened with higher than usual mental resilience. He also neglected direct combat efficiency in favor of aspects that possess sufficient longevity. The presence of Awakened Luster only confirms the fact that our commanding officer puts a lot of value in sustainability. All of that tells me that he has a very mature outlook on combat that is in direct contradiction to his young age." Luster followed along, surprised that he had not come to these conclusions himself. "The big guy is wicked smart." He cleared his throat, then said, "Well, he is a master. Everyone says that the second nightmare is the game changer. Who knows what kind of crap he experienced there. Stuff like that can make a person mature real fast." "Well said." Luster nodded, pleased to receive a bit of praise, but then almost jumped. "Wait, who said that?" At some point, a 7th person had somehow appeared in the gymnasium without being noticed by any of them. He was of small stature, with flawless ivory skin, black hair, and unfathomable dark eyes. The guy was extremely young and looked like a porcelain doll. In fact, he was kind of cute in a strange, unsettling sort of way. Luster frowned. "Who's that shorty?" Then, realizing who was in front of him, he froze. The new arrival smiled. "Good morning, Awakened. I am Master Sunless. You can call me Captain Sunless or simply Captain. From today forward, I will be your commanding officer." He remained silent for a few moments. Then, his pleasant smile slowly turned strangely ominous. Captain Sunless stared directly at the 6 of them and added, "Yes, I killed 400 awakened abominations and hunted down a fallen devil as a sleeper. Yes, I am a distinguished explorer and researcher whose published works are well known in academic circles. And yes, I indeed come from the Forgotten Shore, where I lived in the Dark City completely alone and went, slightly, mad." The frightening smile grew a little wider. "But all of that is in the past. I am utterly sane now. I am not deranged at all. You truly have nothing to worry about." The next 2 weeks passed in a blur. Sonny had so much to do that there was no time to concentrate on any one thing for too long. The first evacuation army camp around him was in a similar state, becoming increasingly more hectic and busy as the date of the naval convoy's departure approached. Luckily, he was more than familiar with having to act fast while enduring immense pressure. The first thing Sonny did after introducing himself to the members of his cohort was briefly reiterate the key objectives of the upcoming campaign, as well as share several pieces of information about the hardships they would most likely have to endure, and the intended role of the first irregular company that his soldiers had not been privy to before. After Sonny finished his briefing, the mood in the empty gymnasium turned somewhat grim. Not wishing to let the 6 awakened stew in their apprehension, he immediately transitioned to the next stage of getting to know his subordinates. Summoning the cruel sight, Sunny smiled pleasantly and asked them to attack him, one at a time. He wanted to kill two birds with one stone, by dueling each of the cohort members right off the bat. First of all, Sunny knew that he had to win their respect. No matter what Master Jet had said, these experienced soldiers were not going to put their trust in him easily. He was young, small, and a complete stranger. Although forging a real bond would take more time and effort, a simple demonstration of strength was a good start. Secondly, he needed to understand their powers and techniques better. A simple duel was the best way to do that. Sunny had an additional advantage in that regard, since his mastery of shadow dance allowed him to learn much faster and peer much deeper than almost anyone else. In the next 30 minutes or so, he ruthlessly demolished each of his subordinates without even breaking a sweat. Although all of them were very good at what they did, his power and skill were simply too domineering. The only ones who gave Sunny a bit of a problem were Dorn and Samara. The former's aspect was very insidious when used with sufficient foresight. While Sunny was strong enough to shake off the force of the big man's aspect, even he had to improvise when subjected to it at exactly the worst and most inconvenient moment. Samara presented a different challenge. Although her preferred method of combat centered around infusing bullets with charged soul essence, she was perfectly capable of simply forming her essence into projectiles without a tangible medium. Even if these soul darts weren't as fast or far-reaching, fighting her meant being subjected to a constant barrage of explosive energy. It was a good thing that the gymnasium was built with Awakened in mind. Otherwise, the whole structure might have collapsed. In any case, neither of them managed to really slow Sunny down. Of course, he took care to exert just enough strength to defeat the members of the cohort in a decisive fashion, but not wound them. After the 6 duels were finished, he had a much better understanding of what his subordinates were capable of. Not only had Sunny been able to grasp the core tenets of their battle techniques, he was also very satisfied with adding 6 nuanced, polished styles to his mental library. Knowing what to expect from the 6 Awaken not only allowed him to form a tentative vision of how the cohort would perform in battle and how to command it to achieve the best result, but also helped him come up with an optimized training plan that would turn them into a semblance of a cohesive fighting force in a short amount of time. Sadly, 4 weeks was not nearly enough time to turn 7 relative strangers into a truly coordinated battle unit. The insight he had received due to shadow dance helped substantially accelerate the process, but the progress was still insufficient. Hopefully, they would reach at least the minimal threshold of mutual understanding by the time the naval convoy reached Antarctica. After coming up with the plan, Sunny did not linger before putting it in motion. To his amusement, the training facility assigned to the cohort happened to include 7 Dreamscape pods. These were different from the one he had back home, however. Instead of being connected to the public selection of arenas, it was integrated into a closed network operated by the government. It was also centered around battles with simulated nightmare creatures, as opposed to personal duels. Sunny was even able to tune the battle scenarios to fit his goals and personal preferences to a certain extent. At first, he was very enthusiastic about this novel method of training, but then grew slightly disappointed with it. Dreamscape was simply incapable of simulating the true madness and dread of the nightmare creatures. The illusory monsters they fought were strong and threatening, but lacked the spark of life and the perverse intelligence that made the real deal so deadly. Illusions were simply incapable of pressuring the cohort enough. So, Sunny found something else to really pressure his people. Himself. After the first few days, he allocated significant time to battles where all 6 had to contain a single target, their captain. While Sunny looked much less frightening than a nightmare creature, his subordinates quickly learned that he was infinitely more terrible. After an especially intense clash, the six awakened crawled out of the dreamscape pods and wandered off to grab a bite and rest for a bit. Soon, several of them gathered in the staff kitchen attached to the gymnasium. Luster was rubbing the shoulder he had bruised in one of the real-world training sessions as he groaned. "Devil, he is a devil." Sonny, who sat comfortably in his luxurious memory chair on the other side of the building, studying a topographical map of Antarctica, looked up from the screen of his communicator and grinned. That guy is closer to the truth than he thinks. Meanwhile, back in the kitchen, Samara glanced at Luster with disapproval and shook her head. Unexpectedly, Kim decided to support the young man. "Actually, our captain, he might really not be a human, I think." The aloof beauty looked at her with confusion. Exposed to so much attention, Kim shifted uncomfortably. That all humans share common weaknesses. Temple, inner thigh where the artery is close to the skin, and so on. But Captain Sunless, he does not. It's like his skull is indestructible, and he doesn't bleed. Luster's eyes widened. "See, I am telling you guys, he is a nightmare creature in disguise. We will all die before even reaching Antarctica." Samara stared at him for a few moments, and then said nonchalantly, "You know that he's probably listening, right?" Luster flinched and almost fell off his chair. On the other side of the building, Sonny put a hand over his mouth to stifle a wicked laugh. While the intense and arduous training slowly taught the members of the cohort how to fight together, Sonny had several other time-sensitive tasks to complete. Keeping up with all these concurrent responsibilities really tested his mental capacity, but there was no other choice than to simply grit his teeth and do it. Probably the most important of the tasks facing him was to allocate his contribution points and acquire various assets to strengthen the cohort. However, that was not a straightforward issue. After several days of studying how his subordinates fought and getting acquainted with their memory arsenals, he was finally ready to make some decisions. To do so, he chose a moment when the three members of the melee vanguard, Bell, Dorn, and Quentin, were busy in the dreamscape pods, and called his other three subordinates over. After all three of them were specialists in various support fields that had to do with the cohort's equipment. Kim was a technician, Samara was a capable spelltech engineer, while Luster was supposed to be an ace pilot. That wasn't really useful in this situation, but what was Sonny supposed to do? Leave the poor guy to sulk all alone in a corner? After consulting with Kim and Samara, he gained a lot of insight into what would be the best way to spend the contribution points. The Rhino might have seemed like a simple transport vehicle, but it was really so much more. Sonny did not know a lot about war and strategy, but he knew that mobility was one of the most important factors when determining the impact a combat unit could make. That was especially so for the cohorts of the 1st Irregular Company, which were supposed to be elite rapid response units that had to constantly travel between various flashpoints to provide support to the ground troops. So upgrading their APC was of paramount importance. The question was which aspects of the Rhino had to be upgraded the most. In the end, Sonny settled on several major upgrades. They were not what he had expected to pick before consulting with the pair of tech specialists. Instead of adding more armor to the Rhino's hull or incorporating a powerful cannon to its forward section, most of the improvements ended up being hidden from sight. The Rhino received a comprehensive overhaul that replaced its already formidable power reactor with a much more potent alternative, which in turn demanded the whole energy transmission system to be torn out and replaced with a more robust one. Among other things, this upgrade vastly improved the logistics of the cohort, since the new Spelltech reactor did not need mundane fuel and could be charged by Luster instead. The guy turned out to be useful for something, after all. The second major upgrade, unexpectedly, centered entirely around the command and communication suite situated in the rear of the vehicle. Sunny had not paid it much attention before, but after receiving input from Kim, he understood how important it was to get his hands on a better system. With all the gates opening in Antarctica, communicating with other units, and the command HQ of the evacuation army was going to quickly turn into hell, being able to maintain a stable connection was even more important for the irregulars, since the cohorts were meant to act semi-independently while being coordinated by Master Jet from a distance. Luckily, the upgraded reactor was capable of supplying a lot of juice to the communication suite, so Sunny could easily replace it with a much more advanced and powerful system that, hopefully, would have no problem punching through the mass of interference. The added external antennas, both the comically tall telescopic one and the more modest parabolic one, could be retracted and hidden beneath the armor at any moment. The third upgrade was the most esoteric and abstruse. It involved extremely advanced spelltech applications which Sunny did not really understand, so he simply told Samara to choose the best option. It had to do with shielding and insulating the core systems of the APC from the detrimental effects that the nightmare gates produced. Everyone knew that gates messed with technology and electronics in weird ways, but very few people understood how and why. Considering the nature of the chain of nightmares, Sunny had to make sure that the rhino would not simply stall and die in the middle of nowhere for no apparent reason. So, even though it cost him a painful amount of contribution points, he chose to acquire the most expensive set of countermeasures available. Sunny did not shed a tear, only because his subordinates were watching. Before letting the specialists go, he made another acquisition. Knowing what Samara was capable of with the right armament, he decided to enhance her combat performance by getting his hands on the most powerful mundane weapon available to the members of the 1st Evacuation Army. As the result, the cohort became entitled to receive an incredibly powerful, by the standards of mundane soldiers, of course, mechanized rifle. The thing was made of incredibly tough alloy and included various dampening materials to make its internals more resistant to concussive damage. It was as tall as Samara herself and possessed a long, fearsome barrel. Sunny initially thought that the rifle was a railgun, but was corrected and found out that it was actually a different type of a mass driver known as a coil gun or Gauss rifle. He had heard all those words before, but had no idea what the difference was. Not that it mattered. All he needed to know was that the rifle was incredibly powerful and capable of propelling solid slugs forward with stunning speed. It could also fire them in 2 modes, subsonic and supersonic, which could be useful if the cohort ever wanted to remain discreet. Technically, the rifle was too heavy and powerful to be wielded by a human. It was meant to be utilized by a soldier encased in a full exoskeleton armor suit, or even serve as a light weapon for the smaller humanoid war platforms. But as an awakened, Samara was just strong enough to manage. After making this acquisition, Sunny let the 3 specialists go and rubbed his palms together. Then he went forward and spent his remaining contribution points on miscellaneous items, and more importantly, better memories for his soldiers. As a mad grin appeared on Sunny's face, his eyes shone with greedy light. Staring at his communicator, he couldn't help but laugh. Ungrateful brats, Daddy brought you gifts, hee. Sunny spent a lot of time considering what was the best use of the contribution points allocated to him by the Army as far as memories were concerned. He had no doubt that the cohort was going to encounter hordes of nightmare creatures in Antarctica. Hopefully, he and his soldiers would survive, which also meant that they would receive a lot of memories and eventually even echoes throughout the campaign. Still, most of those abominations were going to be either dormant or awakened. How powerful of a memory could killing such a creature bring? Additionally, any boon received in battle was bound to be arbitrary. Even if it possessed considerable power, who was to say that this power was going to fit the members of the cohort well? So now was his best and only chance to get his hands on potent memories that perfectly suited his soldiers and himself. However, nothing was ever simple. Despite the fact that the government had been extremely generous, outfitting 6 awakened, let alone a master, was not cheap. If Sonny had not spent the lion's share of contribution points on upgrading the Rhino, he might have been able to acquire a good amount of powerful tools. As it stood, he was desperately short on funds. This was why he had to make several painful decisions. Firstly, he gave up on getting something that he himself could use and chose to concentrate on the needs of his subordinates. That really leaves a bad taste in my mouth. Sonny let out a mournful sigh. There was just no denying it. His personal arsenal was already a bit too outstanding. He had to console himself by remembering that his 6 soldiers were, in a sense, an extension of this arsenal. They were meant to become his most powerful weapons. So empowering them was the same as empowering himself. Secondly, purchasing echoes were also out of the question. Although there were plenty to choose from, the cost was just too high. Sonny might have considered getting one if he could turn it into a shadow, but he already knew that he had to possess the corresponding shadow in his soul sea to transform an echo. So his main goal was to enhance the equipment of his soldiers in a meaningful way. Sadly, even that was mostly out of his reach now. That was if Sonny did not cheat, of course. But why wouldn't I? An ominous smile appeared on his face. Sonny was in a unique position to get most of what he wanted while spending a vastly smaller amount of contribution points than anyone else would have had to shell out. After all, he was an aspiring sorcerer. Purchasing dozens of powerful memories might have been out of his reach, but with some luck, he would not need to. Requesting a powerful ascended sword for Bell would consume a considerable chunk of his remaining contribution points, for example. But purchasing a dormant weapon with a suitable enchantment would not. All he had to do was study its weave, and then transplant the enchantment on the swordsman's current blade. In other words, Sonny planned to treat the memories he purchased as building blocks of powerful tools, as opposed to tools themselves. That way, he could get much more value from the contribution points in his possession. The only disadvantage of this approach was that it would immensely burden Sonny in the coming weeks. Nevertheless, he was willing to try. Even if not all of his attempts of transplanting weaves were going to succeed, he was confident that a sufficient amount would, if he chose the right ingredients, of course. Sonny studied the vast list of available memories for a while, then sighed and left the gymnasium. He had to inspect the goods personally. Sometimes, it was easy to forget that most awakened did not enjoy his ability to peer into the very essence of memories and receive a handy description of what each enchantment was supposed to do from the spell. That was something that consuming a drop of ichor that had fallen from Weaver's eye gifted him. And while there surely were aspects that allowed a select number of people to do something similar, most awakened simply had to rely on vague feeling and experimentation to unlock the full potential of their memories. It took some convincing to make happen, but eventually, Sonny was allowed into the main armory of the army encampment. There, he found several dozen of awakened busy with paperwork instead of thousands of memories resting on the shelves, waiting to be allocated to various units. The logistics of the whole system were a true nightmare, since memories could only be transferred in person. As the result, each was assigned to an awakened supply officer who served as a walking arsenal and was supposed to personally deliver the chosen memory to the recipient when requested. Sonny would have looked like a complete fool if he demanded each of these officers to manifest their entire inventories for his perusal, not to mention that such a thing would take forever to complete. Luckily, he had narrowed his selection to a comparatively short list of memories that were both cheap and had great potential. Now, He just had to take a look at them to make sure that the weaves were suitable and easy enough to copy. Sonny had a lot of goals, ranging from comparatively simple to achieve to those that required a great effort on his part and could end in failure. For example, there was a dormant memory that came in the shape of a straight razor. Its only enchantment, according to the description in the government database, made it extremely sharp. Trying to hack and slash nightmare creatures with the tiny blade was a recipe for disaster. But what if he could imbue Belle's sword with the same unnatural sharpness? There was a cloak that had no other purpose than to make its wearer weigh less by a couple of kilograms. In and of itself, the enchantment was not too useful, but what if he applied it to Dorn's unwieldy sledgehammer? Better yet, what if he managed to transplant the feather of truth, enchantment of the mantle of the underworld, to it? Even though Sonny still had trouble working with complex weaves of ascended memories, he felt that he had a solid chance of success. What if he could purchase 6 cheap charms and enhance each of them with resistance to cold that the memory of ice provided? Thankfully, he could spend his contribution points to receive soul shards required for these manipulations, as well. Of course, the task was daunting and complicated. Not only did Sonny have to collect all the necessary ingredients, spend a lot of time and essence to create countless strings of essence, study the new weaves, and actually succeed in replicating them. He also had to take other factors into account. The difference between passive and active enchantments, the capacity of the memories being changed, the rate at which his awakened soldiers would have to expend their limited reserves of essence to maintain the more powerful effects, the synergy between them. All of these concerns were enough to drive a person mad. Not to mention that he only had several weeks to achieve this ambitious goal, while simultaneously overseeing the training of the cohort and performing other important tasks. He would probably improve his nascent mastery of sorcery, at least. Staring at the confused supply officers, Sonny rubbed his face and groaned. So much to do, damn, is being a captain always so stressful? Several days later, Sonny was sitting in the mess hall of the military bunker, consuming a generous portion of food without too much enthusiasm. A couple of other captains of the first irregular company, as well as Master Jet herself, ate with a bit more appetite. Sonny did not look too good. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his whole presence was subdued and listless, a telling sign that someone was running low on essence. At some point, Winter gave him a dubious look and asked, "What's up with you? You look like you're about to topple over." Sonny waved a hand dismissively. "It's nothing. I'm just tired because of all the stuff I have to do before we depart. Being an army officer is not a breeze, as it turns out. Who could have thought?" The woman stared at him for a few moments, then grinned. "Oh, right. I forgot that this is your first command posting. You have yet to discover the wonders of delegation." Master Randall shook his head. "There are many things that can't be delegated. Plus, you have to know what your subordinates can handle to assign them tasks. I think that you are doing fine, kid." Sonny wanted to retort that he was not a kid, but thought better of it after glancing at the grizzled veteran. Vandal was almost old enough to be his grandfather. If anyone had the right to regard him as a junior, it was Master Randall. Winter shrugged. "That's true. I am actually impressed by the cohort you've managed to form. It is unexpectedly well-rounded, although I am surprised by several of the choices you made." Sonny raised an eyebrow. "Really, why?" She leaned back and looked at him. Well, Sonny assumed that she was looking at him. In truth, the laid-back beauty could have been staring at anything from behind her old-fashioned sunglasses. Don't get me wrong. Each of us has tried to create a cohort that can remain effective in all kinds of situations. But we have our biases, nevertheless, so every cohort except yours tends to lean toward a certain specialization. Take pride, for example. That slippery bastard recruited all the stealthy creeps from the roster. Sonny stared at her without amusement. You do know that I am a creep myself, right? Then he froze for a moment. Wait, that didn't come out right. What I meant to say was that I specialize in stealth as well. Winter snorted. Really? You don't really look like a backstabber. Sonny crossed his arms and looked at her with a smirk. Well, obviously. If I go around looking like a backstabber, people would be on guard against being stabbed in the back, wouldn't they? That just defeats the purpose. Master Randall let out a gruff chuckle. He makes a good point. Sonny nodded, then let out a heavy sigh. To tell you the truth, I did my fair share of backstabbing in the past, which really helped me survive. But mostly I tend to find myself in situations where I'm surrounded on all sides. Stealth is a powerful tool, but it can only get you so far. So, a well-rounded cohort is the best choice, in my opinion. Luckily, my aspect is versatile enough to support all kinds of compositions. He lingered for a bit, then asked with curiosity, what do other cohorts specialize in? I've been too busy to keep up with what you guys are doing. Winter took a bite out of her sandwich, chewed it slowly and shrugged. Ah, the usual. Davis went with the stealthy approach. Venerable Vandal here is all about melee carnage, so is Mustang. With the added emphasis on speed and finesse, I am more of a ranged superiority gal. Dale is a bit like you, but with a slant toward robust defense. As for our courageous leader, she looked at Master Jet and smiled. Actually, I have no idea. Her cohort is weird. Soul Reaper gave them a nonchalant glance. It's not that weird. I just picked people who can enhance my own battle performance in various ways. We are meant to wipe out the enemy by channeling our deadliest weapon, me, in the most efficient way. She remained silent for a few seconds. In any case, there are only several days left before we have to board the ships. Once we do, most of our decision power will be gone. Any additional preparations we'll be able to make at sea are going to be limited to a specific direction. So, now is your last chance to account for things you might have missed. The captains looked at each other with somber expressions. After a long pause, Sonny asked, any suggestions? Master Jet thought for a bit. You are not too familiar with how gates affect us, are you? He shrugged. I know the basics, I guess. Randall shook his head. That is not really enough. For us government officers, a big part of our duty has to do with containing the nightmare gates, so we know them the best. You are a master, so you must have experienced the call at least once. Correct. Sonny cautiously nodded. He had indeed experienced the strange pull that both gates and seeds exerted on Awakened. It felt like the nightmare was calling to him. The grizzled veteran continued with a scowl. Well, the call does not just affect the mind. It exerts a very substantial influence on reality as well. Namely, it can mess with your tether and the dream realm anchor. Sonny scratched the back of his head. He knew about that strange anomaly, of course. He had just never encountered it himself. How severe is the interference? The older master lingered for a second. Not too severe, but it grows worse the closer you get to the gate. In the immediate area around it, the call overrides both the tether and the anchor. What it means is that if you decide to jump into the dream realm near an active gate, you will be pulled toward its seed instead of your citadel. Same goes for the awakened who fall asleep in the vicinity. He paused and then added, actually, we often make use of that property. If a gate manifests in a populated area and needs to be closed quickly, we can dispatch a cohort of challengers to the seed through the call. A saint might help out and bring them there immediately, or they can wait until the first wave of nightmare creatures is cleared and take a nap. Although that is more dangerous, since the challengers will have to search for each other, and the seed in a potentially hostile region of the dream realm. Master Jet sighed. That is not important right now. Usually, it is not too difficult to avoid being displaced by the call. All awakened have to do is maintain a bit of distance between themselves and the gate. However, her expression darkened. With how many gates are expected to manifest during the chain of nightmares, who knows what the situation will be? We'll have to keep the potential danger in mind and manage the sleep schedule of our soldiers, lest they are whisked away. I advise each of you to stock up on stimulants at least. Sonny remained silent for a while, thinking. Eventually, he tiredly rubbed his face and said in a somber tone, "I'll take that into account." On the second to last day before the departure of the first evacuation army, Sonny and his cohort had nothing much to do. The gymnasium they used had actually been dismantled the previous night, so it was impossible for them to continue training. Of course, Sonny could have come up with an inventive way to put his soldiers through more grief, but he eventually decided against it. Instead, he gathered them on the wall of the port fortress for an improvised picnic. Leaving the northern quadrant was a big occasion, especially considering that they were going to war. This was probably going to be their last chance to relax and enjoy themselves in complete safety, so it would have been a shame to miss it. The cohort enjoyed a lavish meal consisting of various tasty dishes Sonny had commandeered from the officers' mess hall. There were even beverages that were technically prohibited by Army regulations, even though they had very limited effect on awakened. The 7 of them watched as heavy containers were being loaded on the massive ships in wistful silence. Well, at least 6 of them did. Luster, meanwhile, was secretly ogling Samara. After a few moments of silence, the tall woman suddenly said in an even tone, "What are you staring at?" The young man flinched and awkwardly looked away. That's a wicked scar you have. How did you get it, Sam?" Samara, indeed, had a prominent scar that stretched all the way from her shoulder to her forearm. Since the sleeves of her bodysuit were currently rolled up, a part of it was on display. She briefly glanced down at her arm, then shrugged. "When I was around your age, there was a gate that opened on top of an unfinished city barrier. As one of the closest awakened to the site, I was among the first responders. We held the nightmare creatures off while the construction crews were evacuating. Anyway, there was an explosion, and I was thrown over the edge. Luckily, my arm got caught on some scaffolds. It hurt like hell, but at least I didn't fall all the way down to the ground and turn into a puddle." Luster blinked a couple of times, then grinned. "That's nothing. I actually had my entire right arm bitten off once. A giant stone worm somehow tunneled under the citadel I was anchored in, and then emerged from underground, swallowing the gateway in one go. Those of us who survived had to fight it off, but then got stuck on the pieces of rubble, surrounded by a swarm of smaller worms." He paled a little. Smaller compared to the first one, of course. Each was at least 10 meters long, actually. The only good thing about the bastards was that they could only move through soil, so we were safe as long as we remained on top of big chunks of stone. We did so for a couple of weeks, but when our food and water were gone, we had to make a run for it. I killed an entire worm myself, but not before the damned thing gobbled up my arm. Luster was fortunate that he had lost his limb in the dream realm. Although it must have caused a lot of damage to his physical body, he had not been crippled for life. The young man looked around and gave Belle a cocky smile. "What about you? What's the worst you've been hurt, huh?" The swordsman thought for a bit. "Well, I guess it was a few years back. I was stationed at a remote research outpost, all the way out there in the wilderness. We had a gate open nearby, and the entire facility ended up being overrun. I was pretty much the only one to survive, but the nightmare creatures were on my heels. I had no means to contact the HQ as well, and the nearest human settlement was 1,000 kilometers away." An amused smile appeared on his face. "It took me about a month to reach it on foot. The pursuing abominations were easy enough to deal with, but the air, suffice it to say, by the end of it, I was constantly coughing out chunks of my lungs. That was the worst I have been hurt. Luckily, a kind ascended healer lent a hand to help me recover. A disturbed silence settled over the cohort. A few moments later, Dorn suddenly snorted. That reminds me of my solstice. The very first nightmare creature I stumbled upon managed to thoroughly crush both of my legs. I had to drag myself through the mud for 2 entire weeks of slow, painful crawling to get to the nearest citadel. That was many years ago, of course, but no abomination has managed to do such a number on me ever since. Since everyone seemed in the mood to boast about their battle scars, Quentin hesitated for a bit and then decided to share a story as well. I was captured by a nightmare creature that looked like a giant spider once. It put me in an impenetrable cocoon and filled it with digestive fluid to turn me into an easily consumable slushy as spiders do. The problem was, I was able to heal myself a little bit faster than the acid was dissolving me. Still, after several weeks of that, my patience grew really thin. Kim looked at him in horror. How did you escape? The gallant man smiled. Well, while the acid was slowly corroding my body, I was slowly corroding the cocoon. It gave out before I did, fortunately. However, I failed to avenge the other victims and kill the spider. It is still out there somewhere. I hope we'll meet again, one day. Kim looked down and then sighed. I was actually never hurt too badly. There was this one time when my entire cohort contracted a strange plague, though. It was a really torturous disease, and it quickly spread to the entire citadel. Many people died in agony. Eventually, we found out that the plague was a manifestation of a bizarre terror. Once we did, a saint of the great clan Song arrived and somehow managed to destroy it. I, as well as those who were still alive, were spared. Luster patted the young woman on the shoulder. You did well, Kimmy. Then he looked at Sonny, hesitated for a few moments and cautiously asked, what about you, Captain? Have you ever been hurt real bad? Sonny scratched the back of his head. Oh, let me think. I had my ribcage crushed once, I guess. I was also disemboweled, poisoned, burned, and drowned. One time I was even burned and drowned at the same time. Luster blinked. How could anyone be burned and drowned at the same time? Sonny gave him a lively smile. Easy, you just need to be drowned in molten metal. But the very worst physical wound I have ever received, has to be getting beheaded, I guess. That one really stung. Honestly, I do not recommend getting decapitated if you can avoid it. It's really not worth it in most cases. The 6 awakened were staring at him with strange expressions. Sonny cleared his throat. What? It truly isn't. Trust me, I should know. The next day, the exodus of the first evacuation army from the northern quadrant finally started. Sonny and the other captains observed the mass of humans, machinery, and cargo containers flowing into the seemingly bottomless cargo holds of the 40 metal leviathans from the tall walls of the port fortress. None of the 6 spoke, consumed by somber thoughts. Master Jet remained silent as well. Behind them, the large encampment that had been bustling with activity just a few days ago was completely dismantled and gone. In front of them was the endless gray expanse of the sea and an uncertain future. Even though only a quarter of the entire evacuation contingent was sailing south from this port today, the scope of it all was truly immense. Looking at the fearsome ships and the flood of soldiers boarding them, Sonny couldn't help but feel a bit of awe. It was easy to believe that nothing would be able to stop such a tremendous force. However, he knew better. After a while, Master Jet sighed. All right, it's time for us to go. Regroup with your cohorts and proceed to your assigned ships. You know what to do if the convoy encounters a disaster on the way. Try your best to survive. Should the flagship go down and I with it, follow the chain of command. Vandal is going to assume leadership over the company in my absence. Master Randall glanced darkly at her and grimaced. Hopefully, I won't need to. Even though the convoy was going to be guided by the emissaries of the House of Night, it was not a given that all ships would reach Antarctica. Naval navigation was always dangerous, and most of the awakened and ascended of the First Army were all but useless in aquatic combat, including Sonny. Glancing at his colleagues one last time, he stepped through the shadows and appeared near a crowded dock. It was not hard to find the members of his cohort, since most people gave them a bit of space out of respect. Walking up to them, he put on a confident mask and asked in a relaxed tone, "Are you ready?" Everyone nodded, except for Luster, who suddenly seemed concerned. Actually, I've never been on a ship. I won't get seasick, right?" Sonny stared at him for a few moments, then shrugged. "You are an awakened, are you not? Awakened are supposed to be resilient to such things. So, we'll see, I guess." Luster's face dropped. He lingered for a few moments and sighed. "Somehow, I feel like you don't like me very much, Captain." Sonny did not respond. However, Bell suddenly patted the young man on the shoulder. "Well, I, for one, am very happy that you're with us." Luster beamed. "Really?" The swordsman gave him a friendly smile and nodded. "Sure, people like you are very valuable to have around. I mean, one look at you and it's clear that you are going to die first, which therefore means that it won't be me. I feel better already." The young man glowered at him and scoffed. "Don't joke like that, it's not funny." Bell blinked a couple of times. "I wasn't joking." Meanwhile, Sonny shook his head and turned away to hide a smile. "Enough talking, let's go." Together, they entered the long pier and moved toward the distant ship. The mass of people parted to let them through and then closed behind them like water. It felt a little surreal. Soon, the solid steel mass of the battleship obscured the sky. Feeling its thick shadow embrace him, Sonny suddenly felt a little calmer. He glanced at the gray waves below, sighed, and stepped on the wide link span connecting the pier to the massive vessel. A few seconds later, the dark maw of the cargo hold swallowed him and his people. Once aboard the ship, the cohort split to perform several tasks. Kim, Luster, and Samara went to check on the supplies allocated to the cohort, including the modified rhino which had already been stored in a special cradle in one of the lesser cargo holds of the giant vessel for some time. Since they had had no access to it prior to today, there was a multitude of checks and diagnostics they had to run. Bell, Dorn, and Quentin followed one of the ship's logistical officers to secure the living quarters for the cohort and get the lay of the land, while Sonny wandered off to the upper deck. There, he walked close to the edge and leaned on the tall handrail, looking down at the distant surface of the water. Images of the forgotten shore and the dark sea rose from the depths of his memory, making him shiver. As Sonny waited for the fleet to depart, his shadows explored the battleship. Even if he would not be too useful should a swarm of nightmare creatures or some colossal horror of the depths attack the convoy once in transit, he was still determined to memorize every nook and cranny of this giant steel coffin, just in case. The prospect of handing his life into the hands of strangers did not appeal to Sonny, to say the least, but he did not have a lot of choice. For the next 2 to 3 weeks, the crew of the battleship and the nightwalkers in charge of the convoy were going to decide whether all of them lived or died. Curses! Sonny was suddenly very unhappy with the fact that he did not acquire any powerful swimming-related memories. Even if they could only give him an illusion of being safe, it would have been still better than nothing. Maybe I should make it a priority once we reach Antarctica. I doubt that this is the last time I have to traverse vast amounts of water. Come to think of it, isn't it strange that I, of all people, have neglected seafaring so much? After spending so much time trying to escape the dark sea, even a complete fool would have learned to respect water. But maybe that was the reason. On the forgotten shore, Sonny had grown very accustomed to equating depths to death. He had never considered the sea as anything else because of that. Slowly, the last stragglers of the first evacuation army boarded the metal leviathans. The gates of the cargo holds were closed, the hatches were fastened. Massive chains rattled as the anchors were raised. The whole battleship beneath him vibrated as its mighty reactors came to life. Slowly at first, then faster and faster, the convoy started to move. 40 mountains of alloy and steel sailed forward, their bows cutting the waves like giant blades. Thousands of people moved in their metal bellies, breathing life into the iron beasts. Sonny looked as the port fortress slowly grew smaller and smaller. Soon, the shore became veiled in a murky haze. The first evacuation army had left the northern quadrant. After a while, nothing surrounded the convoy but the vast expanse of rolling waves. The 40 colossal vessels moved in a narrow formation, with the fearsome flagship serving as the arrowhead of the expeditionary fleet. Hundreds of formidable cannons were aimed in all directions, their fields of fire overlapping to create a lethal exclusionary zone around the procession. Nevertheless, Sonny was not reassured. He stared at the undulating surface below for some time, a dark expression never leaving his face. Despite the grandiose magnitude of their passage, the convoy moved with a surprising measure of quietness. If not for the sound of water being displaced by the mighty bows and splashing against the alloy armor, Sonny could have closed his eyes and imagined that there were no other ships around him. Wasn't it strange that he had felt much more comfortable aboard flying ships than these far more reliable seafaring vessels? He sighed, then activated his communicator and accessed the Maritime Safety Procedures Manual provided to each member of the First Army. In the past weeks, everyone had to study the sizable document and run a few exhausting drills to familiarize themselves with the strange rules of proper naval conduct. Sonny had a better memory than most, so he practically learned the manual by heart. While its general structure was rather easy to understand and explained what passengers of the ships had to do if a ship or fleet-wide alert was issued, there were a lot of strange and seemingly esoteric rules included as well. For example, the manual had passages like, if you start to experience recurring nightmares or experience persistent auditory hallucinations, report to the nearest Navy officer immediately. Or, in case of alert level being raised to condition black, cease all activity and motion. Do not produce any sounds, disturbances, or vibrations. Do not summon memories, and above all else, do not actively circulate soul essence, and so on. There were several alert levels, differentiated by their color. Condition black was among the highest and most dire, inferior only to condition red, which meant that the whole fleet had to prepare for an all-out battle. However, there were plenty of regulations that fell outside these established routines. Even though Sonny had no idea what most of these rules were supposed to prevent from happening, he felt a little bit calmer knowing them. Ships move between the quadrants all the time. Hell, there are even some that constantly travel between West Antarctica and South America. There's no reason to worry too much. He sighed, then shook his head dejectedly and decided to leave the upper deck. Whether Sonny liked it or not, he was going to have to spend the next several weeks at sea. Letting paranoia get the best of him would not do anyone any good. There was a lot for him to accomplish still, from checking up on the Rhino to finding out what kind of facilities would be available to the cohort during this dangerous cruise, and implementing changes to the training plan. Not to mention the fact that he had to continue upgrading and augmenting the memories of his soldiers. As he walked toward the nearest hatch, Sonny suddenly spotted a lone figure standing at the bow of the ship, gazing at the vast expanse of water as he himself had been just a minute ago. The man was tall and wore a midnight blue coat that moved slightly in the wind. Beneath it was a black bodysuit much like the one Sonny was wearing, but also slightly different. It was made out of a strange material and looked much more like a wetsuit than a garment meant to be worn under armor. Although the stranger stood some distance away, Sonny could somehow feel his presence all the way near the hatch. It was subdued, deep and mysterious, tantalizing even. Sonny had no doubt that he was looking at another master. He hesitated for a few moments, then shrugged and decided to approach the unfamiliar ascended. As he did, the man turned around and glanced at Sonny with a wary gaze. He was around 30 years old, handsome, and with eyes of an unusual, beautiful indigo color. Strangely enough, his black hair also seemed to possess slight accents of dark blue, at least when exposed to direct sunlight. This close, the feeling of mystifying depth radiating from the stranger was more pronounced, as if most of him was hidden from sight. Sonny already had an idea of who he was looking at. He thought for a bit, and then simply said, "Good day. I am Ascended Sunless of the First Awakened Irregular Company." The man lingered for a moment, studying him. His indigo eyes seemed to be searching for something. Then, unexpectedly, a wide smile appeared on his handsome face. I am Ascended Neve, of the House of Night." He stared at Sonny with a strange expression for a few moments, and then suddenly blurted out, "Are you crazy?" Sonny blinked a couple of times. Neve, meanwhile, laughed and waved his hand in the air a couple of times. Sorry, I didn't. It's just that my daughter is your biggest fan." "And what?" Utterly flabbergasted, Sonny stared at the scion of the famed Great Clan Knight while trying his best to appear calm and composed. Eventually, he shifted slightly and forced out a question. "How old is your daughter, if I may ask?" Neve smiled. "She's 5. A Song of Light and Darkness is her favorite movie. She must have watched it 100 times. The censored version, of course. She just adores your character. You're her idol." I really do apologize, Master Sunless. Please forgive my lack of decorum. I just got excited." The scion of the House of Night remained silent for a few moments, then suddenly produced a piece of synthetic paper and a pen from somewhere, and offered them to Sonny. Sonny looked down with a deadpan expression and raised an eyebrow. What am I supposed to do with these?" Master Neve stared at him for a long, awkward moment. Can I get an autograph? Please. To earn some points with my daughter. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and like the video and comment down if anything wrong in the story, and if have any suggestion to a new novel or want next part of any series, comment down. Our target is to get 1K subscriber. There will be surprise for all of you. Stay tuned.